Hi, I'm Ian Abernethy and you're listening to Tim Smith on the Kung Fu Podcast. If you're a listener to this podcast, it's safe to say that you have an interest in the modern day practice of the traditional martial arts. Therefore, you may enjoy my own podcast, the imaginatively titled Ian Abernethy Podcast. You can find it in all the usual places and at ianabernethy.com. That's IAINABERNETHY.com.
Exploring the culture, the adventure, and the impact of martial arts. That's what Kung Fu Podcast is all about. And I'm your host, T.W. Smith. Welcome to the program. You're in the audience of some of the finest and sharpest martial artists in the world. People that put in a great deal of care and a lot of sweat equity into honing their craft. If this is your first time to the program, welcome. I hope that you'll find it educational and as well as entertaining. In part 4 of Hitting the Mark, we're going to be looking at the details of understanding self-reflection and how that can interrelate to us as martial artists, and in particularly how it can help us start to consider how we work our goals. Before we go any further, I'd like to share a little note that came in from an email, and it says, I was literally just listening to your archery podcast. Then I was thinking about the psychology of martial arts and found an academic paper titled Psyche and Martial Arts by Julius Caesar Macari at the Central European University in Budapest. It was in the acknowledgments, and that's where I found you and your podcast. I just wanted to share that. From Jonathan Snowis. I greatly appreciate you taking the time to share with me your thoughts, what you think about the program, and you can do that on any of the social platforms or as well as go to kungfupodcast.com. So let's summarize where we are here in the last installment of Hitting the Mark. This has been a fantastic series for me. I've even found myself saying hit the mark when I think about what I want to achieve for a day in my wellness or, for example, being a better father. During this episode, I'm going to ask you to consider, how can I use this personally? Or how does this involve martial arts? Remember first that I am not a fan of trivia. So if I'm sharing it with you, it is because there is, at least in my feelings or beliefs, that there are meat on the bones, something that is useful and applicable for us. And finding how we can apply things means a lot to me. Have you ever had to work with someone that it just felt like most of the time the relationship, the conversations were just not hitting the mark? They fell short in being directive or productive. Or if you were at a martial arts seminar, it just seemed that one person had this chip on their shoulder. Occasionally, during this episode, I'd like for you to consider those things. So if you're ready, I'm ready. Archery, self-reflection, and the field of ethics. Remember that the field encompasses everything, not just the targets. The other people, the situation, the timing, the expectations that are held on that field. Also recall that for the Confucians, archery involves two things: skill in positioning yourself to ensure proper aim, and strength in discharge to ensure that the arrow reaches the target. For Confucius, wisdom is very similar to skill. That term is Ji. And sagacity is the term associated with strength. Confucius also suggests that skill is interrelated with humanity, positioning yourself well. This term Ren, which I'm just going to be translating as humanity, is the virtue of the virtues, the ones that all the others must pass through. The feeling that you have of dignity and respect for all men. Therefore, in the archery metaphor, humanity is where one returns when one fails to hit the mark. This is the position from which one's stance can be evaluated for its correctness. Confucius teaches accordingly that if one fails to effectively express concern for others, one must turn to examine one's own humanity. So if we can't take the time to consider others, we need to take the time to consider ourselves. Similarly, when we must deal with the jackasses of the world, when we are basically treated inconsiderately, it is to one's own humanity that we must return. We must start with ourselves. However counterintuitive it may seem, the area of self-reflection may be in the presence or absence of the human association. In other words, to reflect on the self is to reflect on the quality and sincerity of one's relationship with yourself and with other people. If on self-reflection one finds oneself sincere and committed in one's associated living, so you feel like you're doing the right things, then one can trust the appropriateness, your actions and judgments, as they're discharged from that position. In the Confucian estimation, as long as you remain correctly positioned with respect to others in associated life, one will not stray far from the mark. Confucius would say, if one's ji, or wisdom, is set on humanity, one can do no wrong. When it comes to passing judgment, only a person of humanity can be approving or disapproving of others. Confucius gives us a vivid account of what this self-reflection might look like when you're really in the heat of the moment. When someone treats you in an unacceptable manner, the exemplary person will turn to themselves and say, I may be lacking in humanity and be without ritual propriety. Otherwise, how could such things happen to me? Now, if you take an instant, consider whether or not you're serving the greater good and you're doing the right things, and the unacceptable behavior continues, then you're going to return to the mark again for just an instant and ask yourself, perhaps I have failed to commit myself to the very best. And if in that moment you reflect and you think, well, no, I did give my very best, and the unacceptable behavior is continuing, then you can conclude this person is truly unruly. And as such, how can they be distinguished from even an animal? What can one do with an animal? So, when we're dealing with the unruly, inconsiderate jackasses of the world, you know that one, the one that asks you for a meeting to be there with you but continues to check their phone or responding to text messages during the meeting, gives you no guidance, or is sitting there gossiping, or the one that interrupts you repetitively during a conversation because they want to make sure you say the right thing so they finish your sentence for you. As prescribed by the archery metaphor, the archer in this case first turns to seek for the misfire or this contention in oneself. Maybe you ask, did I come in here with a crappy attitude? Was I predetermined that there was going to be a conflict? And if you realize you didn't, then maybe you just try a little bit harder. I figure at least once to be nice, and then if not, they're just an animal. So once you've determined that your position is firm and you didn't go in there with a crappy attitude and you didn't go in there looking to, light a spark to the gas, then you can be confident that you have not discharged from your position in a poor way. You have tried to be wise and appropriate in your interaction. It's also important to remember that when you take that moment to do sincere self-reflection, it will lend itself to developing tremendous courage and strength in the face of adversity. Here is where Confucius would recognize you as having exemplary courage. It is reported that he often would say, if you find yourself upright and well poised on self-reflection, then you can go forward, even if thousands of people oppose you. This sort of strength and discharge correlates to the second component of the archery metaphor, this unyielding conviction and perseverance befitting of the sage. It is a distant but achievable goal. If you are aimed properly, then practice having the strength to hit that target every time. Call it out, stand strong. Sagehood aside, it is important that for most people, Positioning remains a primary concern in the ethical experience. Having proper ethical sensibilities is fundamental. Such wisdom begins with adopting the correct stance, one that is positioned in the way, the Confucian Tao. This is where Chief Tecumseh's prayer keeps going through my mind. So live your life that the fear of death can never enter your heart. Trouble no one about their religion. Respect others in their view and demand that they respect yours. Love your life. Perfect your life. Bring beauty to all things in your life. Seek to make your life long and its purpose in the service of people. When you arise in the morning, give thanks for the food and for the joy of living. If you see no reason for giving thanks, the fault lies in yourself. Abuse no one and nothing, for abuse turns the wise ones to fools and robs the spirit of his vision. The essence of Chief Tecumseh's prayer kept resonating with me as I was reading and going through this podcast and doing this study of this last episode. How much of it is about the reflection of self and your interaction with others. Confucius would tell you that without wisdom at the beginning, the strength of one's conviction is irrelevant, as the arrow is likely to miss the mark. So it won't matter how strong you are if you're not aiming in the right direction. You're going to end up basically missing the mark. And I have unfortunately done that more times in my life than I'd care to reveal. But it's really helped me try to reevaluate not just the targets I set, but the reasons why, how they're interacting with others. This has been a very interesting personal undertaking. And for a moment, if you don't mind, I'll share with you, for example, how I started rewriting some of my goals and objectives with these things in mind. So, for example, in the target setting of hitting the mark in the area of health, it was always easier for me to set at least a target up and says that I want to be 12% body fat and have excellent mobility, or be able to run a mile in less than 12 minutes. And that is what Confucius might say as a singular archer. It's all about me, and it's all about me hitting my target. As compared to an exemplary approach that may read more along the lines, to better play with my son, work well with my peers, and not be a burden upon my family as I age. My weight needs to be within range, and my waist circumference less than half my height. By keeping my joints healthy and in full motion, I will be in much better condition to stay mobile. Now, that was a rough draft of me changing how I write my personal notes. It was done to include people I care about, family and friends. This irreducible social nature of ethics has become evident. The field of ethical experience, much like the field of the traditional archery contest, like the field of any martial arts challenge, it is populated not with separate numerically distinct archers, but with social role-bearing participants engaged in communal activity, supported and ennobled through ritual form. As such, the archery contest represents associated humanity itself. The two ideas, in fact, are functionally equivalent. For the early Confucians, the moral Tao, the way, the moral field, is bound together with the human community, of which you are a part of. Confucius would tell you that humanity and the way are interrelated. You can't separate them a great deal. He would say, for example, humanity is like archery. Archery is the Tao of humanity. Humanity is what it means to be human, and to accord with this and to teach it is Tao. In the Confucian tradition, just like Mr. John Dewey stated that we had in the last podcast, all morality is social, not because it ought to be, but just because it is. Without other people, there would be so little need for anything considered as ethics. Similarly, without archery contests, there would be no targets. no aims, no hits, and no misfires. As for such, humanity is not a private virtue, but rather a function of one's integration in the interpersonal relationships that you have, a measure of how integrated the self, yourself, is with others in sympathy and deference. As explained, everything is here with us. There is no greater joy than inspecting one's own person and finding it well integrated. To conduct oneself in a way that shows persistent consideration for the demands of others. This is the shortest route to humanity. Accordingly, self-reflection in the face of ethical difficulty, and in my mind I'm translating into the face of jackasses, I've got a lot of work to do, means to reflect upon one's humanity. It means to rely on one's experience with others for the wisdom to do what is appropriate. As the early Confucius would see it, the firmer one is positioned in associated life, the more attuned one is to the demands of others. And this is the only real factor in ethics. In this case, the field of ethics is as wide as the arena of your human associations. And the Tao extends from this field as well as furthered by advancements in the human experience. So we have associations with people. This is the field. The way, the Tao, extends from this field into our experiences. The archery metaphor suggests that there are norms that govern the ongoing Tao of human life, and there are several qualities of personal conduct and attitude that make for hitting the mark along the way. Poise, civility, elegance, decorum, community mindfulness, sincerity, and camaraderie might suggest itself as a tentative list, but this inventory of concrete virtues is nearly endless. The key, perhaps, is to recognize that the primary components of Confucian ethics, yi, run, li, and ji, are bound together into a single whole, not only in the ji that defines personal character, but in the communal nature of ethics itself. Run is the humanity that I've mentioned before. Yi is your ability to feel what is the right thing to do in the given circumstances. Li is the guide to your relationships and the proper actions. It gives us some order. Ji, that's what this whole program has been about. The first episode on was explaining that, where your strength and aim have intertwined to become one act. I began writing a list and journaling about the way that these last 4 episodes has helped me as a person, as a martial arts practitioner, and as a teacher, even as a dad. And I'll be sharing that very soon as well. I hope you've enjoyed this episode and the 4 installments of Hitting the Mark. If you'd like to support this program, go to kungfupodcast.com/support. Have a fantastic practice today, and I'll be talking with you again real soon.